Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. La'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, charity for the charity box, and then someone has to take it. Pass this over there, please. And then someone has to take it for the to give to whatever charity, not the temple. Whatever charity. Okay, so to go over a little bit what we did last week, Talmud. All right, let's just recap a little bit. Talmud is it's known as the oral Torah or the Torah Shebaal Peh. Torah Shebaal Peh, and it is the idea that God says to Moses, remember the Sabbath. Moses says, God, what does that mean? God says, do this, don't do this. Moses passes it to Joshua, passes it to the elders, passes it to the prophets. Ultimately, that's written down and codified. And that becomes what we know as Talmud. Structurally, there's the Mishnah, assembled by Judah Hanasi, Judah the Prince, and then the additional on top of that called the Gemara. And together, structurally, that makes Talmud. Talmud actually means you will study or you will teach. Philosophically, there's Halakha and Agadah. Halakha meaning law, although it literally means a way of going. Agadah meaning lore, the stories. Again, I want to reiterate, the vast, vast, vast majority of people you will ever study Talmud with will tell you that the halakha is important and the Agadah is not. I believe that the halakha comes out of the Agadah. So I'm in the minority, but Heschel sits on the side that I do, so I figure I'm in good company. Okay. There is one book, and I bought a bunch of copies.
So the
by the way, look what we got new
stories.
The Agadah is the stories, the halakha. We got some great cards I'm going to put up in terms of lessening or washing, going to the bathroom and stuff. So these are pure. That's Pure Avot. Pure Avot is the one book, the one tractate of Talmud that does not have Gemara. It's only Mishnah. Again, some words so that we remember them. Masekta means tractate or folio. And machlochet means debate or argument. Okay?
That sounds so Jewish.
It's Hebrew, yeah, it's Jewish.
I mean
that's where we get it from. See, that's a great point. This is where people say Jews like to argue. This is why. Because of Talmud. Because we recognize God is infinite. Someone has to decide to take this and do it somewhere. We recognize that God is infinite. And if God is infinite, then none of us can have the exclusive monopoly on understanding God. Therefore, it's through the debate that we start to understand things. Remember, we studied last week about Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish and how they're debating together. Yochanan says with Reish Lakish, I would pose 24 questions. He would pose 24 other questions. We would start to understand the matter more clearly. And that's really a very Jewish attitude. And the idea is that you're doing it for the sake of heaven, not to be victorious, but rather, so that we can, that we argue so that we can understand the infinite better. And that's really an important piece of Judaism, an important piece of why we've learned to think the way that we do. I think we need another couple of handouts, which hopefully we have. Who has their handout from last week on Talmud? Okay, a couple of those. Do you guys have yours from last week? Okay. So do we have any more of these, the Talmud handouts that start up Pure Avot?
No.
Okay. So we're going to have to share it. Wait. I got two more. So you guys can share over there, and you guys can share over there. Okay. No, if you guys can feel Lois, if you guys can, she can share. She can just share with you. Okay, so we're going to study two pieces of Talmud today. Pirkei Avot is just for you to kind of peruse. If you want to take it home with you, take it home, but please bring it back. Our library is take it, bring it back. Okay? Did you start that book, by the way?
Yeah.
It's great, isn't it?
I can't say that yet.
Okay. It's challenging too. He took this book over here, A Passion for Truth, which was the last book that Heschel ever wrote. That Rabbi Shulchan gave me a bunch of copies because he wants me to teach a class in it. I just haven't gotten around to doing a class because he gave it to me right before the pandemic. Okay. But I would like to do that after spring, to do a class in that, because Shulchan asked me to, and Shulchan asked me to do something. I try to do it. All right, so we're going to study a bit more Talmud. Now let's remember that if you see, when we're reading it, if you see R, it stands for rabbi. A small b stands for ben or son of. So my son is Benjamin Shoshan ben Rav Moshe Israel HaKohen. Right, so little b means son of, big R means rabbi. And the dark print is what it actually says in the Talmud. And the lighter print is the editor's version of trying to make it into sentences, because Talmud is written in a shorthand. It's interesting. I pulled up what we're going to study tonight in Steinsaltz's Talmud. Steinsaltz did a translation and commentary on the Talmud, and it reads not entirely differently, but it's significantly, it's the same themes, but it's significantly different because of how he pieces the sentences together. It's really kind of interesting. So if we look at these handouts and we go to the page that starts,
Which one?
the one that starts Pirkei Avot, the one, but and we go to the page that says on it, the oven lo bashamayim hi. Don't have to page. It's not actually Baba Metzia 59a, but the page that says lo bashamayim hi. Do we have enough copies of the Shabbos one that we just made? Oh, so you know what? We're going to start with the Shabbos then. We're going to start with Shabbos.
How many pages is it?
It's 6 pages. So we're going to start with Shabbos then. Well, I take it back. We're going to start with Shabbos. It starts on page 29b, but it's really on 30a. So remember, Talmud has 2 pages, an A and a B for each number of each Masechta. So we're going to start with this where it says Mishnah. Wait. Orlando's got more. He's got more coming. Each one is 6 pages. We got more coming.
Oh. All right. Yeah,
It's already in order. It's already in order. It's already in order.
more pages.
And the first page says Mishnah on it.
I don't have that.
First page says Mishnah on it. Okay?
You have it?
And we get more copies. All right. So this is from Masechta Shabbat, the book on that deals a lot with Sabbath. And this is, last week we studied some law and some lore, some Agadah and Halacha. And tonight we're going to study 2 different passages. One from Masechta Shabbat, one from Masechta Baba Metzia, which get more and more Agadic, for lack of a better word. So the first page, it says Mishnah on it. Would someone like to read the Mishnah? This is the first part of it, where it says one who extinguishes a lamp. And forget about the notes. Those were notes. This is actually copied off a handout that I got long ago and wrote my own notes on it. So, yeah, these are actually my notes from many years ago. So if someone, and I just copied that page. So someone would like to please read where it says, one who extinguishes a lamp on the Sabbath.
I will.
Go.
Mishnah, one who extinguishes a lamp on the Sabbath because he fears idolaters or bandits, or because of melancholia, or he extinguishes it so that a sick person may fall asleep. In all these cases, he is exempt.
In other words, we know you can't extinguish a light on Sabbath, right? You can't put it out. So they're talking about, well, because it's considered work, right? So when can you? Okay, and so they're saying that, what's being said here is that because he fears idolaters or bandits, so that a sick person may fall asleep, or because of having melancholia, he's exempt. He's forgiven for it. Go on.
But if he extinguishes the flame to spare the lamp, to spare the oil, or to spare the wick, he is liable to bring a
Chatas offering. So if he has an obligation to make a sacrifice, must to bring an offering,
Okay.
if he's doing it for one of those reasons, but the other ones he doesn't have to do that. Even though it's forbidden, he doesn't have to do it if it's for those purposes. But if it's to save the wick, save the oil, then he does. He may have to do it anyhow so he can keep the candle, but he has to bring an offering. Okay? Everyone with me? This is what's being discussed. Okay, please continue.
A dissenting view. Rabbi Yosef exempts the perpetrator in all these cases, except in the case of the wick, for through extinguishing the flame, the perpetrator makes the wick into charcoal.
Okay, so Yosef is saying it's not just for a sick person to fall asleep, but it's to spare the lamp. Any of those are okay. They're all exempt except for the wick, because the wick is then made into charcoal. It's changing the physical structures. Now they're going to talk about it. And what I really like about this passage, this whole thing we're going to study, is remember we've talked about the Talmud is an organic conversation, right? It's organic dialogues. They have an argument. They have a concept that they're having a debate over, machloket over, but they are in that process going to talk about all sorts of things. Look, in 10 minutes, we've talked about construction, high rents on the west side, a Sabbath, Tu B'Shvat Seder, right? That's how conversations work. If you try to follow Talmud linearly, it's painful. I'm just telling you. They call it cutting or breaking your teeth. It's like going to a dentist without anesthesia. If you just let it flow through you like a symphony, it's so joyous. Okay, and that's what we're kind of studying. All right, so, and again, this is, Torah we have and Tanakh we have, but now Talmud is where we start getting, how do we practice the laws? What do we do? How do we do them? Because they're all based on real questions. This came about because someone came to the court and said, can I extinguish a candle during the Shabbat if it's so a sick person can fall asleep? Can I extinguish a candle on Shabbat so I can spare the wick and save the money? That's what prompted these conversations. They weren't done in a vacuum or theoretical. They were all done based on practical things. All right, please continue a little bit with the Gemara, Carolyn.
Gemara. Throughout this tractate, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon dispute the level of intent and design necessary for labor to be prohibited on the Sabbath. One facet of this dispute concerns whether or not one is liable for performing a labor not needed for its defined purpose. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that one is liable for such an act, whereas Rabbi Shimon asserts that one is not. In light of this dispute, the Gemara analyzes the authorship of our Mishnah.
Okay, so now again, all that stuff was written by the commentator, by the Schottenstein Talmud, which was a lot of different rabbis, unlike this Steinsaltz Talmud, which is just Steinsaltz. Part of the reason the man was just one of the greatest minds of the last century. Okay, please continue with what it actually says.
Since the latter part of the Mishnah states that the perpetrator is liable when he extinguishes a flame to spare the oil, we can infer that our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Yehuda, i.e. our Tana holds that one is liable for performing a labor not needed for its defined purpose. But if so, what case are we dealing with in the first part of the Mishnah?
So if we're looking back, the second part has to do with Yehuda saying that one is liable for doing these things, but then what's the first part about? So go on. It's going to. This is when you wonder why we argue so well, why we make such good lawyers. Because if you're trained in Talmud, there's a reason Alan Dershowitz is Alan Dershowitz. Okay, there just is. There's a reason. When you're steeped and you learn this from the time you're a child, you start studying this stuff. You start analyzing the minutia of arguments and really looking at each little part of the issues. So we see in a much clearer way as a result. I mean, I think that every first-year college student should take a class in Talmud, just because they'll think. I think every first-year law student certainly should. But I also agree with Shakespeare. No one got that.
I'll do with the lawyers.
Kill the lawyers. I'm kidding. Yes. All right, go on, please.
All right, the Gemara explains the problem. If, when the first part mentions extinguishing a flame for a sick person, it's dealing with a sick person whose life is endangered. The Tana should have stated that the act is permitted, implying that there is no infraction whatsoever.
So look at the argument. Now they're even looking at, wait a minute. It says if it's a sick person, but is it a sick person who's got a cold or a sick person whose life is in danger? Because it makes a difference, doesn't it?
Sure.
See how brilliant this is? It's how we start to explore. Okay, come on. I get excited. Go on.
Okay, he should not have said that the perpetrator is merely exempt. And if, on the other hand, the Mishnah is dealing with a sick person whose life is not endangered, then the Tana should have said that the perpetrator is liable to a hatas offering to atone for the act.
So this is the question. It's got to explore this. Go on.
Okay, the Gemara proposes the solution. Really, the Mishnah deals with a sick person whose life is endangered. And thus, in truth, the Tana should have stated that extinguishing for his benefit is definitely permitted.
Because it says in the Torah, we should live by the words of the Torah, not die by the words of the Torah. So even though it's forbidden on the one hand, if it saves a life, it's absolutely permitted. There's no chatat or offering. Go on.
However, since the Tana needed to state in the latter part of the Mishnah that the perpetrator is liable to bring a hatas offering, he also, for the sake of symmetry, taught in the first part that the perpetrator is exempt.
So in other words, this is to make an argument to have it symmetrical.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah.
follow me? Tell me when you get lost, because this is just let it kind of flow
There
through
he
you.
is.
It's going to get more and more interesting, I guarantee. Go on.
The Gemara cites
Because right now, let's be honest, who really cares about this topic of can you put a candle out or not? Okay, I mean, let's think about that for a minute. Okay, does this? So they argue about this stuff, but there's always, to my knowledge, always a deeper reason. You don't go to an expert and ask them a simplistic question, right? So if they're dialoguing about it, you find constantly there's something else underneath that they're really, because they're arguing about this. Why would they argue? Look, just put the candle out, Joe. You know, who cares, right? So there must be something else going on here, and they're going to get to it. That's why I love this particular passage. Please continue.
the Gemara cites a Barisa
An early teaching.
that puts forward a law similar to that of the Mishnah, but that cannot be reconciled through the answer just given by the Gemara.
So you see how they're arguing it's just arguing back and forth, right? So go on.
Similar law. But what of that which Rabbi Oshia taught in the following Barisa? As for extinguishing a lamp so that a sick person may fall asleep, one should not extinguish the lamp. And if one does extinguish it, he is exempt from bringing a hatas offering, but his act is forbidden under rabbinic law. This Barisa clearly deals with a sick person whose life is not endangered, yet it rules that extinguishing is a violation of rabbinic law only.
Okay. Everyone see this is a little confused. Who else is confused by this a little bit? Let's be honest.
I'm confused.
Now,
Right? It's giving multiple sides of the argument. It's arguing for both sides. Now you know why we're so good at this.
Oh, but the Gemara resolves the difficulty. Yay. That Barisa indeed deals with a sick person who is not endangered, but it reflects the view of Rabbi Shimon.
Okay, so Shimon, remember, was the one that said one is not liable for such an act. Okay, so they're arguing with each other. Is that everyone following this? Just let it kind of flow through. Let's see if we get. Go on.
In connection with the law set forth in the Mishnah, the Gemara records a question asked of a certain sage. The following question was put before Rabbi Tanhum of Nevi. Is it permissible to extinguish a lit candle for the benefit of a seriously ill person on the Sabbath?
So a specific question is asked of this rabbi. Go on.
This query was apparently posed before a crowd who had gathered to hear a lecture from Rabbi Tanhum. As the Gemara proceeds to relate, Rabbi Tanhum used the question as a springboard to deliver a homiletical discourse on a related theme.
Homiletics is simply put the art of sermon giving. Okay, so using stories, using whatever information to convey a teaching. When you take a class in homiletics, what you're taking a class in is how to give a speech, how to give a talk, how to give a teaching. Okay, that's what homiletics actually is considered.
Rabbi Tanhum opened his discourse and rhetorically addressing himself to King Solomon said,
Okay, so the question's posed before Talmud. Let's go back. The question is posed before Talmud. Is it permissible to extinguish a lit candle for the benefit of a seriously ill person on the Sabbath? And he's going to start Instead, opening his discourse by rhetorically addressing himself to King Solomon, who's been dead. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
You, O Solomon, where is your famed wisdom? Where is your understanding? Not only do your teachings contradict the teachings of your father David, but your teachings even contradict one another. Rabbi Talmud.
Yeah, don't try and read my notes. I can barely read them anymore.
Elaborate.
That's then you're really going to break your teeth. Okay.
Your father David said in the book of Psalms, the dead cannot extol God, which implies that the living are in a more favorable position than those who have already died. Yet in opposition to this, you have said in the book of Ecclesiastes, and I praise the dead who have already died more than the living who still live.
Sorry, he's being asked a question about a candle being extinguished on Shabbat, and he's starting to talk about who has more value, the living or the dead. Seems unrelated, doesn't it? Okay, right now it's like, wait a minute, I just asked you a question about can I put out a candle, and now you're talking to me as if you're rhetorically talking to King Solomon. What the, right? This is it. But let's watch what happens, because this is why you have a history of 2,000 years of educated Jews being able to dialogue, debate, argue, and understand. Okay, because it's seeing different pathways, and the goal is, as Jews, we should all think as rabbis. It'd be nice if rabbis thought as rabbis, but we should, if we think as rabbis. I had a conversation. I'm going to just interject this. I had up until recently, you could apparently become a Reform rabbi having never studied the Talmud. It was an elective class. When we were open during, we didn't close, right? So 2020, a Reform rabbi, his wife had put out to a very large community, Rabbi Barclay and his board should be arrested and die because we were open in 2020. So I called this rabbi, whom I do not know well, but I'm not going to say, if I told you the story, and I'm not going to say his name. And he actually, and I said, he said, you're killing people. No, we're not. You don't know what we're doing. You don't know the precautions we're taking. You're killing people. It's illegal. I said, look, you know that in the Talmud, it says that the temple was destroyed because of this type of baseless hatred. And his response to me was, we're Reformed Jews. The Talmud means nothing to us.
Wow.
Very prominent Reformed rabbi. Well, I don't think he's a rabbi, but he's an ordained man. I think he just has always used the pulpit as a political bully pulpit. But so I want you to understand how important this stuff is. How really it makes us think. And, I think it makes us better human beings and better Jews, better rabbis, better everything. So please continue. That was my little side note. We continue. More than the living who still live.
And furthermore, you have contradicted your own words too. For later in Ecclesiastes, you retracted and said, for a live dog is better than a dead lion. You have thus contradicted both your own words and those of your father David.
So Rabbi Talmud starts off on this dialogue about a candle saying, Solomon, you're a shmendrik. On the one hand, your father said, right? Your father said very clearly about, that the dead cannot extol God.
Right.
And on the other hand, you say you praise the dead who have died, and then you say a live dog is better than a dead lion. You're all over the map. You keep contradicting yourself. And yet you're supposed to be the wisest man in all of history. How could this be? Please continue.
Rabbi Talmud begins to resolve the first of these contradictions, but in actuality, there is no difficulty here. For when David said, the dead cannot extol God, this is what he was saying. To every possible extent, one should involve himself in the study of Torah and the practice of mitzvot before he dies. For once he dies, he is forever idled from the study of Torah and the practice of mitzvot. And from that point on, the Holy One, blessed is he, derives no more honor from him.
In other words, we honor God by studying, and once you're dead, you can't keep honoring that way. Because we're making the choice to study. Right? So he's trying to resolve this seeming contradiction within Solomon. Go on.
Rabbi Talmud corroborates this concept with another Amoraic teaching. And this is the same idea that Rabbi Yohanan expressed. What is the meaning of that which is written, I am counted among the dead who are free? In what sense is a dead person free? For once a person dies, he becomes free of Torah and mitzvot insofar as he can no longer study Torah or perform meritorious deeds.
Milam haba, you can't give charity.
Having explained the idea behind the phrase, the dead cannot extol God, Rabbi Talmud proceeds to show how Solomon's statements do not contradict it. And when Solomon said, "And I praise the dead who have already died more than the living who still live," he meant that once a righteous person has spent his life fruitfully in the pursuit of Torah and mitzvot, he becomes an even more influential in death than he was in life.
So if you spend your life learning and integrating Torah and doing the most you can with the mitzvot, you have even more influence in the other world. I remember my friend in Selma, Valencia, who was the chief of the Aki when he died, and I was talking to his widow. Kathy said to me, "You think he was powerful here? His arm is a lot longer now that he's in heaven." It's not just our cultural belief. If you've dedicated your life to trying to be better, to trying to do this, the idea is from the other world you have even more influence. So continue, please.
For when the Jews sinned in the wilderness and worshipped the golden calf, Moses stood before the Holy One, blessed be he, and intoned many prayers and pleas before him, imploring God not to destroy the Jewish people. And after all these entreaties, he was not answered.
So Moses says, for the sake of your own embarrassment, don't kill the Hebrews. For the sake of our children. But when he says the following, continue.
Mm-hmm. But when Moses finally said, "Remember for the sake of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, your servants," he was immediately answered, and God pledged not to destroy the nation. Thus did Solomon not speak correctly when he said, "And I praise the dead who have already died."
Makes sense? So now this is about a candle extinguishing on Shabbat. Let's just remember what the topic here is, okay? And now we're talking about the power of someone who's dead and how things will be done. We do Misha Berach, right? We do prayers for healing. The one who healed, all of our ancestors may heal these people, right? So the idea that because they're dead, they also have this great influence. And yet, the dead can't extol God in the same way. So you're studying this and you're having to argue both sides, aren't you? And see the validity in both sides. This is, Carolyn, what leads us to historically have that kind of skill set. Okay, so someone else continue, because she's been already reading. Someone else continue, says, Rabbi Talmud provides another explanation of this verse along different lines, because, we give many arguments. Who wants to read? Somebody. An alternative interpretation.
Okay, let's see. The way of the world is that a ruler of flesh and blood will issue a decree, and his subjects might fulfill it, and they might not fulfill it. And even if they do fulfill it, they will likely fulfill it only in the ruler's lifetime.
That's true, right?
Yep.
King makes a decree. People might do it, they might not do it. And when he dies, they definitely might not do it. Go on.
And after his death, they will not fulfill it anymore. But Moses, our teacher, issued many decrees and ordained many ordinances, and they stand firmly in place for all eternity. Thus did Solomon not speak correctly when he said, "And I praise the dead." Certainly he did. A further explanation of this verse is presented. An alternative interpretation.
So this guy's talking about a candle. He's now made an argument about who's more important, the dead or the living, and why are they more important, or how are they used, and it just keeps giving more explanations and interpretations on the argument that he's making that seemingly has nothing to do with the candle. I guarantee it goes back to the candle. Guaranteed. Okay, I've studied this before, so I'm telling you.
You know the ending.
I know the ending. I can guarantee you it's going to get back there. That's kind of what we do. Okay, continue, please.
An alternative interpretation. The words, "and I praise the dead," etc., and can be construed in accordance with that which Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. For Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, "What is the meaning of that which is written? Display for me a sign for good, so that my enemies may see it and be ashamed."
Okay, so this is when David has sinned with Bathsheba. Okay, remember we studied all that, right? And he prays for forgiveness, and God says, I'm forgiving you, right? But David is also concerned about how the rest of the world is going to view him. Has God forgiven? So he actually says to God, display for me sign of good so that my enemies may see it and they be ashamed, because his enemies were picking on him, saying that philanderer, etc. Okay, that's the context of the story. Please continue.
The verse alludes to the following events. After King David's transgressions involving Bathsheba, David said before the Holy One, blessed is he, Master of the universe. Forgive me for that sin. God replied to him, you are forgiven. David then pressed further and said to God, display for me a sign in my lifetime that will prove to all that I have achieved penance. God said to him, during your lifetime, I will not let it be known publicly that I have forgiven you. However, I shall make it known in the lifetime of your son Solomon.
So now we're talking about David's sin, God forgiving him. And I just want to remind you, what's our topic? What's the underlying question? A candle. On Shabbat, can you extinguish it? Okay, in order to preserve someone's life, right? And now he's talking about David and forgiveness and Solomon. So he starts talking with Solomon, and he moves from Solomon and this argument and how Solomon's contradicting himself, and then he starts talking about David now. Please continue. Welcome to Talmud. Do you see why you can't try and do this linearly? It just doesn't work. If you flow with it, it's like listening to a symphony. Okay?
The Gemara describes the event through which David's forgiveness was made known. When Solomon built the holy temple, he sought to bring the ark into the Holy of Holies. However, the gates of the Holy Holies clung to each other miraculously and could not be opened. Solomon recited 24 songs of prayer, but he was not answered, and the gates remained closed.
So now he's trying to bring the ark into the Holy of Holies when the temple's built, when Solomon builds the temple, and the gates won't open up. They're locked, and they won't open. They're magically closed, okay? And he prays, he recites Song of Songs, and they're still remaining closed. Please continue.
He then began and recited the following verse. Raise up your heads, O gates, and be uplifted, you everlasting entrances, so that the King of glory may enter. Upon hearing this, the gates ran after him, attempting to swallow him.
Remember, I said that this is Agadah, right? This is sort of phantasmagorical, right? The gates are now they're so angry at him, they're going to go try and eat him up. Go on.
For they said to him, who is this King of glory? Is it yourself you describe? Solomon replied to them, it is not myself to whom I refer, rather it is Hashem, the mighty and strong. Solomon then went back and said, raise up your heads, O gates, raise up your everlasting entrances, so the King of glory may enter. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts is the King of glory, Selah. Yet even after these proclamations, Solomon was not answered, and the gates remained closed.
So now he's again, it's about a candle, but now he's trying to get into the Holy of Holies. Gates are locked; they won't open up. He prays; they won't be opened up. He says, "Open up for the King of Glory." They say, "You think you're the King of Glory? We're going to swallow you up." He says, "No, no, no. God's the King of Glory." They're still not opening.
As soon as he said, "Hashem, God," turn away the face.
Turn not away.
Oh, what?
Turn not away.
Oh, turn not away. Okay.
As
The
soon-
anointed one. Remember the pieties of David, your servant. He was answered immediately, and the gates opened. At that moment, the faces of David's enemies turned dark with humiliation like the bottom of a pot that had been blackened by fire. And all the nation and all the Israel knew that the Holy One, blessed is he, had forgotten David for the
Have forgiven.
sin.
Have forgiven.
Oh. Thus did Solomon not speak correctly when he said, and I praise the dead who have already died.
Okay, because when he finally praises David, all of David's enemies realize David was forgiven, and the gates open up. Okay, you guys all following this? Remember, what's our topic?
Candle.
A candle flame extinguishing on Shabbat for someone who's sick. Is that okay? So he's now talking about David and David's death, and David after David's death, and the piety of when someone who's holy has died and have their influence, and all this stuff. Okay, please continue.
Okay. And I praise the dead who have already died. Certainly he did. The Gemara finds an allusion to the story above in a verse recounting the end of Solomon's inauguration festivities. And this episode is alluded to by that which is written. On the 8th day, he dismissed the people, and they blessed the king. And they went to their tents, joyful and glad of heart, for all the goodness that God had done for David, his servant, and for Israel, his people.
Okay, so now we've got this whole concept that the Gemara is saying, and look, everyone was happy. They had, after 8 days of celebrating and in David's name, and they got the ark and the holy into the Holy of Holies, and they went to their tents joyful, glad of heart for all the goodness that God had done for David, his servant, and for Israel, his people. Okay, who wants to read? Oh, yes.
Very quick, man.
Hi, Meryl.
We lost you.
We what?
We lost you.
Okay, where did you lose me? I got to know where is the document on there, first of all? Okay. Okay, so we got to put the document up there if we can. All right, so we started off with discussion of the question before the court is, can you extinguish a candle on Shabbat when somebody is sick? Right, that's the question. Rabbi Tanchum starts talking about, he's going to give a public discourse on this. And so he starts talking about King Solomon. And he starts talking about King Solomon, which is more, who has more value, the dead or the living, and why. And they're taking both sides of both arguments, right? He's expressing in his homily, think of it as a sermon, his high holiday sermon, and he's expressing both sides, right? And he's expressing that the dead are more valuable. This is why the alive are more valuable. This is why, and the dead are more valuable. How powerful David was, and Moses. We still observe Moses' laws, even though he's dead. And David was forgiven, and we knew after his life was over, he could be forgiven, and the gates opened up, and we know that David was forgiven, and so even in death he had influence. Meryl, did that help a little bit? You can text me a yes or no just as easily if that's quicker. I hope that helps a little bit. So that's where we are, right? And so the Gemara is kind of arguing about this because remember, the question is, can a candle be extinguished on Shabbat for someone who's sick? But this rabbi, who's very rabbinic, is one of the great sages, is taking us on a journey. Just feel through the journey, right? He's taking us on a journey. If we want to say, wait a minute, what's this got to do with the candle? We got to have faith that the rabbi is going to get us there because he's a good rabbi. Okay? That eventually, through all of his machinations, he's going to get us where we need to go. And right now, he's talking about Solomon and now King David. All right? Did that help a little bit, Meryl? Did she type yes or no?
No, not yet.
It didn't help yet, or she hasn't typed?
No. She hasn't replied yet.
I confused her so much that it's okay. Well, she has a question. She'll pop in more and more, and we're downloading those files.
I'm trying.
Okay, so we can. Either way, we'll get them done. All right, so we'll speak very close. I'll continue reading, since this will be a little louder. Okay.
Okay.
Where do we end? And I pray so later. Okay. The Gemara finds an allusion to the above story in a verse recounting the end. Okay, we just went through that. All right. So now it's going to talk about what happened after that story, when all the people went home and celebrated. And so the Gemara expounds the verse phrase by phrase. When the phrase states, and they went to their tents, quote unquote, it means that upon returning home, they found their wives in a state of purity. Remember, when a woman is on her menstrual cycle, or immediately afterwards, you can't bada bing, bada boom with her, right? She has to go to the mikvah. But they all came back, and all the women were waiting, primed and ready. Yes, there's a question.
So, she replied back on, sorry, lost the connection.
Okay, well, so catch on. That's all right. That's okay. She's going to catch on to the. So at this point, we're now looking at this issue about a candle wick or a candle being extinguished. But he's taking us on a journey. Solomon's understanding of which has more influence, dead or living, and why. We're talking about the dead having influence. We're talking about the breaking of the gates, the opening of the gates when the ark is brought into the Holy of Holies. And so now they're going to understand, what does it mean when it says that for all the goodness that God had done to David, his servant, his people, when it says, what does it mean? They went to their tents joyful and glad of heart. So when it says that they went to their tents, it means they found their wives in a state of purity so they can have sex with their wives. Already everybody's happy. But what the hell does this have to do with a candle on Shabbos, whether you can extinguish it? Right? Okay. So it continues. When it states that the people were joyful, right? Because it says they went to their tents joyful and glad of heart. It means they delighted in the radiance of the divine presence. In other words, they were still very happy because they had this glowing spiritual glow about them. When it states they were glad, okay, this is going to be a little harder for me to read. Glad of heart, it suggests that when the men returned home to their wives, each white man's wife immediately conceived and bore a baby boy. Yes, I do think that's a little sexist. Okay, but so they're all suddenly pure. Everyone's got a spiritual glow around them. They can bada bing, bada boom, and they immediately get pregnant. No infertility issues whatsoever. Okay, so this is what it's saying. But still, what does this have to do with a candle extinguishing on Shabbos? So we continue. This verse then continues stating, for all the goodness that God had done for David, his servant. When it mentions the goodness God had done for David, his servant, the verse really means that God forgave David for all his sin. Now, there's a sin for involving Bathsheba. And when it mentions the goodness God had done for Israel's people, it means that God forgave the people for their sin of eating on Yom Kippur. Okay, which is also a reflection of what happens with the golden calf. Remember, God gives us the Ten Commandments, the second set, on Yom Kippur as a sign of forgiveness for the golden calf. So it's all. This still is not so far answering this question about a candle, but it's interesting stories, isn't it? Okay, I mean, we're talking about who's got more influence, the dead or the living, and why, or where do they have influence, etc. So, Rabbi Talcum opened his remarks by citing these three verses and pointing out inconsistencies between them, and he now is going to explain the last of the verses. And as for that which Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes, a live dog is better than a dead lion. So he's done all this as an introduction to get to this phrase, a live dog is better than a dead lion. Still, this is not answering our question about the candle on Shabbos extinguishing for a sick person. Right? Okay. This he explained with reference to that which Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. For Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, what is the meaning of that which is written in the book of Psalms? Let me know, O God, my end and the measure of my days, what it is. May I know when I will cease. So David writes this. He wants to know when he's going to die. It still is not ostensibly. So you see how he's kind of gotten to this line of David, if you backtrack it, by talking about David's forgiveness and David's influence from the other side. And he got to that by talking about Solomon's quotes about in the other side and living. Does that, everyone's kind of back engineering, reverse engineering? You two look, that whole corner looks like it's kind of like, I don't know, Rabbi. How are we doing on this? Be honest. Are we following it?
Yeah.
Okay. We're all good? All right. We're going to check on it. So now let's continue what it says here. So now he's now going to explain, what does this mean? So now he's taken us on a journey about Solomon to get us about David, about what is a live dog and meaning is better than a dead lion. So now he's going to talk to understand that of Solomon's quote. He's pulling a quote out of Psalms where God's asking how long he's going to, or David's asking how long he's going to live. This verse teaches that King David asked God to reveal what the future held for him. See, David said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Rabbona Shalom, Master of the universe, let me know, O God, my end. Right? And God said to him, replied to him, the decree has been made from before me that a man's end is not known to him. King David then persisted, asking, well, amid the measure of my days, let me know reveal to me exactly how long I'm going to live. Yet here too, God responded that the decree has been learned from me before, God had made this decision before he created the world, that the measure of a man's days are not made known to him. Finally, David asked, may I know when I will cease? In other words, let me know at least the day of the week upon which I will die. And God said to him, okay, you will die on Shabbat. Wait, at least we got Shabbat in. Yes. We don't have the candle yet, but at least we're talking about Shabbat now. That's a good thing, right? Yeah. Maybe we're going to get back to this candle and Shabbat. And King David pressed further, saying, allow it to happen that I will instead die on Sunday, the day following that particular Shabbat. And God responded to him, this is unacceptable. For by the designed turn, the time will have ceased. His designated time will have arrived for the reign of your son Solomon, and the reign of one king may not, I can't really see that, but it may not encroach upon the reign of another, even by the breadth of a hair. So you can't wait until Sunday. So David says, allow it to happen then that I will die in the preceding Sabbath eve. He doesn't want to die on Shabbat. God, however, responded to him, a day in your courts is better than 1,000. In other words, I prefer a single day, God's saying this, in which you sit and engage in the study of Torah, even to 1,000 of the sacrifice offerings that your son Solomon is destined to offer before me on the altar in the temple. I will therefore not allow you to die sooner than the date that I've destined for you. Okay? Poor David. At least we got a little bit of Shabbat going on here. Having learned that he was destined to die on a Sabbath, King David sought to use this knowledge to thwart death. From then on, every Sabbath day, David would sit and study the words of Torah the entire day. In this way, he hoped to render himself invulnerable to the angel of death. Now, I'm going to look at this on my phone because I think I'm going to be able to read it clearer. So please forgive me. And I will read it clear, I think. Yeah, that's going to be a lot easier in my eyes. Okay. He hoped to render himself invulnerable to the angel of death. When the day arrived upon which his soul was destined to come to rest, the angel of death stood before David, but he found himself unable to overcome David, for David's mouth did not pause from studying. If you're studying, the poor angel of death couldn't kill him because he's too busy studying the words of Torah. And even the angel of death can't interfere with the Torah reading. Okay? You guys watching this so far? We're on Shabbat at least, and we're now on a day of Shabbat. That's good news, right? I told you we're going to get back here eventually. I know the end of the story. What was I? Oh, okay. Frustrated by the situation, the angel of death said, what can I do to him? He does not pause even for a moment. But as it happened, David had an orchard behind his house. And the angel of death came and ascended one of the trees and shook the branches of the tree in the orchard. Startled by the noise, King David went out to see what was happening. As he was going up the stairs, a stair caved in under him. For a moment, he was silent, and at that moment, he died. Where the hell's the candle? Okay. Right? But it's a great story, isn't it? And it teaches about the importance of studying Torah. Right? The Gemara recounts Solomon's reaction to his father's death. Upon seeing that his father had died, Solomon sent the following query to the academy, to the Sanhedrin. My father has died, and his body is resting in the sun. Meanwhile, the dogs in my father's house are hungry. What should I do? Because he doesn't want the Lion of Judah, which is the name of, the one of the names of King David, to be eaten by a hungry dog. They sent back a reply to him. Cut up a carcass, lay it before the dogs, for them to eat. As for your father, place a loaf of bread or a young child upon his body and carry it to a shaded area. So look at the machinations these guys do. So you can't move the body. But if you use the body as a table or a chair, you can move the table that's got bread so it can be in the shade. Right? Where the hell's the candle? Okay.
Why can't you move the body?
Because you're not allowed to move it on Shabbat. But if it's being used to hold the...
Okay.
It becomes a table.
Okay, then it's...
So King David with a table.
Why
King
can't
David
you move
was-
the table?
Because you're moving the carrier of the food, and you can bring the food, or you can carry a young child. Okay.
It's pretty.
No, but it gets there. The Gemara concludes, and in light of this reply, did Solomon not speak correctly when he said, "For a live dog is better than a dead lion"? Certainly, he did. In other words, the live dogs we got to get, but they're more important than the dead lion, implying that life is more important than once you're dead. Where's the candle? It's like where's Waldo? Where's the candle? After the above agadic interlude. So all this has been storytelling, right? Clearly, there was a legal question. There was a legal question about can you extinguish a candle on Shabbat in the presence of a sick person? That's a legal question, halakha. And this rabbi has given all this agadah. At least we're on Shabbat. And we know a live dog is better than a dead lion. After the above agadic interlude, Rabbi Tonkin returns to the original question asked for him. And as for the question that I asked of you, here is its answer. In the Hebrew language, a candle is called a candle. What's the word for candle? Does anyone know? Ner. Okay, we're the candle of joy. That's our synagogue, right? In theory. But now you're going to know that you probably should, if you hadn't figured it out, that there's probably another meaning besides the candle of joy or the light of joy. In the Hebrew language, a candle is called a candle, and a person's soul is also called a candle. Because it says in the book of Proverbs, Nishmat Adam Ner Adonai, the soul of the human being is the candle flame of God. So actually, the name of our synagogue also means the soul of joy.
Means the what? The soul of what?
We always refer to it, the light of joy, the candle of joy. But there's another deeper meaning. The deeper meaning is it also means the soul of joy, a joyous soul. Okay? Right? So, because it says the soul of the human being is the candle flame of God. So,
There it is.
Ner is also a human soul. Thus, when one candle must be extinguished so that the other may survive, it is better to allow the candle fashioned by flesh and blood to be extinguished before the candle fashioned by the Holy One. Blessed is he. That answers the question, doesn't it? Better to douse this candle than let the candle flame of God be doused. Does that make sense to everyone? You're loving the way that came back. I told you it would end up. But do you see how the agadic material, the agadah, opens up us to following, going on a journey, and then all of a sudden there's this like, boom. We're not talking about a candle here. We're never talking about a candle. We're talking about a soul.
Thank goodness that you explained it all.
I would have gotten that.
Yes, you would have, but typically this would be studied over many hours, and you'd come to the discussion. Through the discussion, we'd come to it. In a very traditional way, we might spend, 2-3 hours on just this passage, and having dialogues. What does it mean? And we're going to follow the take and everything else.
I don't know why this is, but you're so limited on what you can do on Shabbat, and yet you can cut up a carcass and lay it before the dogs. That's
Food.
You have to eat.
You got to feed the animals.
okay.
You got to feed the animals.
See people the
Compassion.
same way.
You got to treat people. You got compassion. Always trumps. See, one of the reasons I love this passage, this whole teaching stuff, is because it reminds us, at the end of the day, Judaism is about compassion. Judaism is about the human soul. It's not about do this, do that. The do this, do that is to get us to the place of being compassionate, empathetic, righteous, charitable, kind, care, all the things that make a good human being. All the halacha, all the laws are all so that we will get to that place. And this reminds us of this. And it goes through, but it does it in a way where you're examining multiple perspectives on one little tiny thing. Well, then, can we turn down the heat a little bit? I'm schwitzing like a. Well, I'm still schwitzing like a. And they've taken off. We've had a couple jackets taken off. So, Carolyn's taken off her heavy coat.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah.
So, does that make sense to everyone? Do you see the beauty in it now? All right, now we're going to study one of my very, very favorite pieces of Talmud.
This is
So-
going to be the story about the
The oven. I love the oven.
I'm so glad you're teaching this because I've heard it 2 or 3 times. I have
I
never
love the
really
oven.
understood it.
The oven is, Orlando, it's on, this handout is on the no, this one, this one, the
The
old
oven.
one. Okay,
The
this one's on there, right?
The oven one.
Okay, so if you turn in the handout to the page that says, at the bottom right, in my writing, Lo Bashamayim Hi, it is not in heaven. That's on there, right, Orlando? That's this handout.
Who's writing, you said?
It's the one that begins, it looks, the top
Oh,
front
no,
page is
yeah,
this.
Bashaman. Okay.
Yeah.
59A.
It starts with 50 here, and then about halfway through, you get this page that says, Lo Bashamayim Hi. Everyone find it? Lo Bashamayim Hi. It's on from last week, right, Orlando?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very good.
All right, so everyone who's watching on video can find it as well. All right? I love this story. Who wants to begin reading? Where it says the following Mishnah alludes to an incident in which a Tana, an early sage, was offended. After quoting the Mishnah, the Gemara relates the incident and how quickly his prayers were answered. We have learned there in a Mishnah. Who would like to read? The page that looks like this. Okay, the page that looks like this. Where it says Lo Bashamayim Hi over here. Who would like to read?
All right.
So we're reading, this is the right page. We'll start right there where the little bracket is.
Oh.
Okay.
We got it? Go ahead.
The following Mishnah alludes to an incident in which a Tana was offended. After quoting the Mishnah, the Gemara relates the incident and how quickly his prayers were answered. We have learned there is a Mishnah. If someone cut sections for an oven and put sand between sections to cement them together, and the oven then came into contact with
To mine, is something impure. I'm sorry, something.
Rabbi Eliezer declares it tahor, but the sages declare it tameh.
Tameh, impure. Impure. And go on to the next page.
It's the
Next page.
next page. And this is the oven of the colored
Coiled serpent.
coiled serpent. The Gemara explains what is meant by the coiled serpent. Rabbi Yehuda said in the names of Shmuel,
Rabbi Shmuel.
it
Samuel,
meant that they, the sages, surrounded the oven with discussions like this coiled snake and then discarded it susceptible for
being impure. Okay, so let's look at what this means.
It's hard to do.
Yeah, the copying didn't. I got to copy this differently. Okay, so let's talk about what this oven is. It's called a snake or serpent oven. Okay. So, how many of you remember when you were little and you did clay work in elementary school, or you had a child or a grandchild who did clay work in elementary school? Okay. And how do you do it? So you got. I'm gonna be color coded. Watch this. Just wait. I know you're gonna be so proud of me. So you got this oven. Right? It's made like this. Got it? Does that make sense to everyone? It's like those, you have those, you made a coil of rope and it's cemented together. Probably do different colors. Cemented together, right? So the question is this oven kosher? Is it tahar? Is it clean? Is it pure? Or is it tameh? In other words, is this oven allowed to be used or is it not allowed to be used? That is the question before the court. Okay? Everyone with me on the question? All right. Kellen, you said you've been confused by this. You're with me on the question. All right.
Yes, I am.
Question's all about no. All right. So it's two different types of materials that are cemented together. All right? With me? Okay. Please continue reading unless it's not clear, in which case I'll read it. Is that copy just not clear, guys? Okay, well, I'll continue then. Okay, mine's not that clear either, but mine's before that. It's okay. So Barisa tells about the debate surrounding this oven. It taught on that day, Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Rabbi Eliezer is this great mystic. Rabbi Eliezer was Rabbi Akiva's mentor. Okay, this is one of the greatest sages ever, one of the greatest rabbis of Talmudic period. He taught. You all have heard of Rabbi Akiva. Whether you know a lot about him or a little about him, this was Akiva's teacher. This is one of the greats, okay? And he advanced, on that day, Rabbi Eliezer advanced all the arguments in the world to defend his lenient ruling, because he says it's okay, and all the other rabbis say, no, it's not. But the sages did not accept his arguments, so Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha accords with me, let the carob tree prove it. At which point, the carob tree was uprooted from its place and moved 100 yards. Some say 400 yards. So all of the assembly says, Eliezer, you're wrong. And Eliezer says, if I'm right, let the tree prove it. The tree gets up and moves 100 yards. Okay. It's kind of miraculous. It's today. And what do the rabbis say? Unconvinced, the sages said to him, you can't bring proof from a carob tree. So he said to them, if the law accords with me, let the water canal prove it. And suddenly the water in the water canal flowed backwards. Another miracle. The sages said to him, you can't prove it from a water canal. He then said to them, if the law accords with me, let the walls of the house of study prove it. Whereupon the walls of the house of study leaned and were about to fall. Immediately Rabbi Yeshua rebuked the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars vie with one another in a discussion about halacha, what business is of yours? So the wall stopped falling out of respect for Rabbi Yehoshua, but neither did they right themselves out of respect for Rabbi Eliezer. And they still continue to lean to this day. So this is, the walls were leaning, and this was explaining why they're leaning. So Eliezer said, if the law accords with me, let heaven prove it. Whereupon a heavenly echo, Bakol, went forth and proclaimed, what argument do you have with Rabbi Eliezer, whom the halacha, the law, follows in all places? And upon hearing this, Rabbi Yeshua stood on his feet and declared, Lo b'shamayim he, it's not in heaven. God, stay the heck out of this. This is really fun to teach to Catholic students at a university, because they all think the next scene is going to be where lightning strikes everybody. But that's not our way. So what's happened? They got an argument about an oven. And in this oven, Eliezer says it's okay, and the other ones say it's not. You're with me so far, right? Okay. And he says, if I'm right, let the carob tree prove it, and the miracle happens. The carob tree, the rabbis say we don't care. The water, the rabbis don't care. The walls, the rabbi don't care. God says, stop arguing with him. And they say, God, you stay out of it. Because it says in the book of Deuteronomy, in Parsha Shoftim, you should go to the judge of your time and listen to what he says and do what he says. God gave us the Torah to interpret. It's not in heaven. It's here on earth. Does that make sense to everyone? Did I lose anybody over online? No, everyone's good with the story so far. The Torah interjects, what is meant by Lo b'shamayim he, it is not in heaven? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, it means that we pay no heed to a heavenly echo in matters of law, because for the Torah was already given to man at Mount Sinai. You gave us the Torah for us to do with it what we will. The Gemara relates the rest of Rabbi Yehoshua's response to the heavenly echo. We do not pay attention to a bakol, a heavenly echo, because you already wrote in the Torah at Mount Sinai, according to the majority, the matter shall be decided. And since the majority of the sages dispute Rabbi Eliezer's position, his position is rejected. The following incident dramatically highlights Rabbi Yeshua's assertion. Rabbi Nassan once met Elijah the prophet. Rabbi Nassan said to him, what is the Holy One, blessed be he, doing at the moment when Rabbi Yehoshua rejected the heavenly signal and said, God, stay out of it, Lo b'shamayim. Elijah responded to him. The Holy One was laughing and saying, my children have prevailed over me, my children have prevailed over me. In other words, God was happy. We used his laws to get what we wanted. Right? You tell your kid, you can have dessert after dinner, and that's great. So he has one bite of peas. He says, that's it, Daddy, I had dinner. You said I could have dessert afterwards. He's using your logic against you. Right? Not that one anymore. He doesn't get away with that. But they don't even try that one anymore. But how many of us have experienced our children using the rules we have set down to get what they wanted, even against what we wanted? We all relate to that in one way or another. Okay. They learn to manipulate. And what's our reaction? You know what? They won. Right? We're glad that they used and they were thinking. God's doing the same thing. This is generally, if you're only studying part of it, this is generally when the story is stopped. And it is used to justify power being in the hands of the rabbis. Okay? So when someone says, why do the rabbis have this power over Jewish theology? If you track it, remember we studied that part of Parsha Shoftim a number of weeks ago. It says you shall go to the judge of your time and do what he says left or right. And we talked about left, right, east, west is all relationship. Then you take that and now you add this, and the Talmud is saying, see, God gave it to us and God is glad it's in our hands to interpret as we want. This, by the way, is how you get the Reform movement in Judaism. Because in the 1700s, there were rabbis who said, we're more German than we are Jewish. We're going to change the law. We're going to abide by this, not abide by that. We're going to call everyone who's not us Orthodox. And when someone, where do you get off doing that? Well, we get off doing it because look, right here, it says the majority decide. The majority of us right here are deciding that. Does that make sense to everyone? So this passage obviously has bearing even in today's world. And more so than you may even realize. That's generally where it's stopped. If you're taking a Talmud class in most temples, that's where they'll stop teaching the verse. We're not going to stop there because we're not most places. All right. A number of drastic developments followed the debate concerning this oven, and they're recorded. They say that on that day, the sages collected all the things that Rabbi Eliezer had declared pure, tahar, and burned them in a fire. And they voted on Rabbi Eliezer and they excommunicated him. So they've now, over an oven, had these arguments. Miracles have happened. The majority wins and says Eliezer is wrong, but not only are they saying he's wrong, they're invalidating every other decision that he's ever made. They're burning everything, and they're putting him in cherem. They're excommunicating him. Seems a little bit drastic for an oven. And they said, who will go and inform him? And Rabbi Akiva said, I will go, for I'm concerned that perhaps an unfit person will go and inform him and bring about the destruction of the entire planet. Because someone as holy as this mystic Eliezer, if he gazes in the wrong way, he could set fields on fire is the idea. Okay, don't mess with that kind of righteousness. So Akiva goes. My glass is shrunk. Okay. So what did Akiva do? He dressed in black clothing and he clothed himself in black. And he sat before Eliezer at a distance of 4 yards. When do you dress in black and stay 4 yards away from somebody? When they're dead. You don't go that near a corpse. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Akiva, why is today different from other days? Why are you sitting so far away from me today? And Akiva replied to him, my teacher, it seems to me that your colleagues are now removed from you. In other words, they have removed themselves. You are considered dead in their eyes. And so I'm letting you know. Upon hearing this, Eliezer too tore his garments, removed his shoes, slid off his chair and sat on the ground, and they're like sitting Shiva. And tears flowed from his eyes, and at that time the world was smitten. A third of the world's olives, a third of its wheat, and a third of its barley became ruined, and some say even dough already in a woman's hand became spoiled. Horrible. It's horrible, right? The Gemara then continues. A great blow occurred on that day, for every place on which Rabbi Eliezer set his eyes went up in flames. And it even happened that Rabbi Gamaliel, the Nasi, was coming in a boat. So Rabbi Gamaliel is the brother-in-law of Eliezer, and he's the head of the assembly. He's the head of the Nasi. Everyone following the story so far? You're still with me, right, Carolyn?
Yes.
Okay. And a gale threatened to drown Gamaliel. And Gamaliel said, it seems to me that this is because of Rabbi Eliezer. Gamaliel stood on his feet, and he stood, and he said, Rabbono Sha'olam, Master of the universe, it is well known to you that I did not do this, in other words, order Rabbi Eliezer's excommunication, for my own honor or for the honor of my father's household. But I did it for your honor, God, so that disputes not proliferate in Israel. Whereupon the sea subsided from its raging. So it would seem, based on that God was going to punish Gamaliel for excommunicating Eliezer, because it seemed like Gamaliel was doing it to show how much more powerful he was. And Gamaliel said, look, this has nothing to do with me. I did this to stop the proliferation of fights within our people over an oven. Maybe there's something else going on. The Gemara records another consequence of Rabbi Eliezer's excommunication. Ima Shalom, which means literally the mother of peace. The wife of Rabbi Eliezer was the sister of Rabbi Gamaliel. From that incident, which Rabbi Gamaliel excommunicated Rabbi Eliezer onwards, she never let her husband, Rabbi Eliezer, recite the Tachanun supplication. Part of that supplication is a prayer that we say. We don't say it every day, but it's a prayer that is said that calls for the karma to come back on our enemies, basically. For God to protect us from our enemies, to demand swift justice to our enemies. Okay? Those who wrong us. So she didn't want that to happen. Why didn't she want that to happen? Because if Eliezer prays that, what's going to happen to Gamaliel? He's going to die. You're still with me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But one day, she thought it was Rosh Chodesh, when you don't recite Tachanun. But she had confused a full moon with a deficient moon. Remember, some moons, it's a little harder to tell. There are those who say that a poor person came and stood at the door as Rabbi Eliezer was about to recite Tachanun, and she took bread out to the poor person. Either way, she afterwards found Rabbi Eliezer falling on his face in the recitation of Tachanun. She said to him, get up, you're killing my brother. Meanwhile, at the same moment, an announcement went forth from the house of Rabbi Gamaliel that he had died. Eliezer said to his wife, how did you know about Gamaliel's death? She said to him, I received such tradition from the house of my grandfather, King David, that all the gates of heaven are locked except for ona'ah, the gates of wrongdoing, of slander. God will very quickly deliver justice when there's slander or wrongdoing. Everyone with me? So let's just recap for a minute. This is the page that says Hazachav, chapter 4, Baba Metzia, and Mishnah's here. It's right here. You're on the right page. So let's just recap. You got an oven made of two different substances cemented together. They argue. These miracles happen. A carob tree moves. The water flows backwards. Walls start to fall. God speaks, saying, no, it's okay. It's kosher. It's tahor. It's clean. All the rabbis say it's not. They win. And God laughs about that part. But then these horrible things happen, don't they? Eliezer's excommunicated. Barley and wheat are burned. Gamaliel, the great sage, dies. Maybe it's not about an oven. Following us this time?
Mhm.
Okay. Because if it's not about an oven, it seems pretty trivial, doesn't it?
Mhm.
So let's look at a different interpretation. Not a common one, but a different interpretation. And I'm writing an article based on it. You will find it after this, because I said to Rabbi Shulchat, Rabbi, there's something else going on here. Michael, that's a very good idea. I'd like you to write an article on that, please. That's what he sounds like, isn't it? I love that man so much. Do you guys know Rabbi Shulchat? You saw him. Did you know him before that, or you met him?
Yeah, just the day he was here.
He's amazing. He's such a tzaddik. Something else is going on here. Can we all agree on that? Otherwise, this is pretty punitive over a damn oven. We need to take into account where we are historically. And we're taught that remember one of the principles of Torah is that to understand any verse, how do we understand it better? We look at the verse immediately before and immediately after. Remember we studied that? Okay. We're going to do the same thing here. And we're going to think about it. Now, let's say that we were all talking about sexual intimacy right now. Okay? Everyone here is or has been married, right? There's no virgins in this room, I don't think. So we're talking about sex. And a 9-year-old walks in. Suddenly I start talking to you and I say, when the painter dips his paintbrush in the paint, he's got to be very careful what part of the bowl of the paint he's putting his brush. Did everyone understand what I was just talking about? Did it have anything to do with paint? That's how sages speak, right? We speak in the language of those who will understand us around us. So what if this oven's just an analogy for something else that is powerful? Let's look at the verse before and after. Let's go back to the beginning of the verse. It says, Lo Hashemayim, and let's look at the paragraph right before we started. Rabbi Chelbo said, a person must always be careful about his wealth, about his wife's honor, because blessing is found in a person's house only on account of his wife. Okay, honor your wives in order that they may become wealthy. So we're talking marriage, right? Now let's look at the verse immediately after what we finished. The rabbis taught in a baraisa, someone who verbally wrongs a convert transgresses 3 prohibitions, and someone who oppresses the convert transgresses 2. So immediately before this discussion of the oven is a discussion about marriage, and really afterwards is a discussion about conversion, the non-Jew. Everyone with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're following it this time.
This time.
What's the biggest fear 2,000 years ago that is still the fear today, the biggest concern in Judaism?
Assimilation.
Assimilation.
Yeah.
In those times, Roman assimilation. What if it's not an oven, but it's 2 different things cemented together? What if it's 2 people, a Jew and a non-Jew, who love each other? Now, this is a question for the 21st century, isn't it? Right? This isn't just a question that goes back to Talmud. What if it's today? So now it's important, isn't it? Now this is now a real serious discussion. It's not a discussion about an oven, isn't it? Now it's a very serious issue that has continued for 2,000 years. So Eliezer is very, very clear. If two people love each other, how can anybody say God is not present in that relationship? I don't care who the two people are. Right? He's saying two people love each other. One's a Roman, one's a Jew. One's a Catholic, one's a Jew. One's a Buddhist, one's a Jew. One's a what? Right? They love each other. That's holy. And God says it's holy too, because from the heavens perspective, it is. Gamaliel is saying, wait a minute. I did this. I voted against Eliezer to stop the proliferation of arguments among the people of Israel. Let's follow that argument. Meaning, if this Jewish guy marries this non-Jewish woman, some people are going to say the kid's Jewish and some people are going to say they're not. Is this a problem we have today? Absolutely. Absolutely, don't we? They're saying, look, I made a law. I voted on the side of rigidity for the law so that we're very clear. You either have converted to Judaism or you haven't. We're not having interfaith marriage. I did it to stop those arguments that would happen. Not for my own glory, not to say I was right, but to stop the arguments. So I only want you to pretend you're all rabbis, right? Working rabbis. And a couple. Oh,
Sorry, question. Which page is it?
this is the page right before the page that says the case of Baba Metzia, the needs of the tribe versus the will of God. That's actually the article I wrote. But right before that is the page we're looking at. We're looking at the whole process now. So you're all rabbis, okay? And a couple comes to you and says, I'd like you to officiate my wedding. My groom is not Jewish, I am. My bride is not Jewish, the groom is. Do you do it? This is not a theoretical question, people.
Have every right, but
It's a very real question, right? And it was a real question then. What do you do? So here's my question to each of you. You're rabbis. These are real questions. What do you do? An interfaith couple comes to you and says, we would like to get married. We love each other. We're not that committed to all the rules, laws, and regulations and ordinances of Judaism. We'd like you to officiate our wedding. What do you do? Come on, answers.
I like what you say is, let's talk.
Okay, well, we're going to talk. Let's talk. Now we're talking. Okay.
But we're talking about.
Now we're talking. Okay. Which many you understand many rabbis won't even do. They'll just say conversation's over. So now we're talking, and they've decided she's not going to convert. She's a Christian. She's not going to convert. Whether she's an observant Christian or a non-observant Christian, she's a Christian. She's not going to convert. And she does view Jesus as her savior. What are you going to do? Lois, you were shaking your head.
I'm going to quit my job because I couldn't make the decision.
There you go.
Find Reformed rabbi.
What are you going to? The question: what are you going to do as a rabbi? So you're going to say, no, I'm not going to do it. Two people come to you with love, and they say, we love each other. And you're going to tell us that God's not in our relationship, and you won't officiate our marriage? What kind of a nasty religion is Judaism that you're going to be that judgmental? Sorry for hitting on the microphone. That you're going to be that judgmental.
Well, I feel like you should decide before you get married how you're going to raise the children.
Okay, so now we're going to have a dialogue. So you got to decide. Well, we've decided we're going to raise them in both. We're going to raise them in neither. Is that even an issue?
That's what happens a lot of the time.
Yes.
Yes.
It becomes either.
Sometimes
Go on.
I married a guy who's not Jewish, and I did have to go and find a rabbi that would marry us. And I went to conservative. They didn't really want to have anything to do with it. I ended up going to a Reform rabbi.
Which one?
I don't think he's alive anymore.
No, but I may have known him. You're not.
Rabbi Cohen?
Bernie.
Bernie.
Bernie's still alive, thank God, as far as I know.
Really? Okay.
Biggest, darkest tan, brightest teeth.
Yeah.
I think Bernie he used to be in the Valley. I think he's out of Palm Springs. Yeah.
Oh,
I think he's pretty much retired.
So what he had us do is we had 6 sessions with him.
And he charged you. No, he did. Trust me. Go
Some years ago, I don't
Yeah, they
remember
do.
everything, but he asked if he wanted to meet my parents, my husband's mother, his father is deceased at the time. Get to know them, get to know us, get to know, our feelings about things. And he said, once he did that, but I heard he was pretty reformed. He'd almost marry anybody.
There's a great line that a woman who's congregant said that about her father, who was a Reformed rabbi. For the right price, he'd marry a table to a chair.
Yeah.
What do you do? What do you do? So you would say yes.
He said, yeah,
You know, I'm not asking. You would say yes.
yeah, just because of my own personal
Okay. What else?
experience.
Is there a right answer? Or both Eliezer and Gamaliel right on this? Okay, because your kids, how much grief do they ever get at certain synagogues? Probably less. Now it's a little easier because the mother was Jewish.
Right.
So let's make it a little harder. Father's Jewish, mom's not.
Does Judaism even recognize that?
Reform does. Reform,
Do they?
Reform Judaism accepts patrilineal. Yes.
I
Yes.
was always under the impression that
Reform
the
Judaism
mother
accepts,
is not
as far as I know,
Jewish,
Reform
the
Judaism
mother-
accepts patrilineal. That's a decision they've made.
I've never
I have-
heard it come up even.
It comes up
in
all the
one.
time. It comes up.
Nobody's ever asked me how I was a Jew.
I have a friend who is a Reform rabbi, and he will not do an interfaith marriage, but he'll do a gay marriage.
That's interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
And the
As
conservative
long as
rabbis
they're
would
both
do that.
Jewish. As long as they're
As long as they're both Jewish.
Right.
Oh.
Okay?
Yep.
He'll do a gay marriage.
He's reformed.
He's a Reform rabbi, wonderful man.
I know a conservative rabbi who believes that way.
Oh, the one that we're thinking of the same guy. But he'd marry a chair to a table too, let's be honest, okay? We're not going to say who it is. I mean, we love him, but let's be honest. You know, right? What's the right answer? So someone comes to you, you're the rabbi. Says, Rabbi Allen, Jewish guy, non-Jewish girl, will you officiate the wedding?
No. I would refer you to,
No, we're not going to. Or, here's a good one. So they're already married. And they baptized the kid. The mother is Christian. But now the kid's 12 and a half, and they want the kid to have a bar mitzvah.
And he's been baptized.
He's baptized as a baby. What do you do? These are not hypotheticals in my life, at least, okay? These are real conversations that have to happen. So,
that was-
go on.
I have a friend who is very involved in his church, but his church goes all the way back to the beginning of time to our laws and takes it all the way through. And they celebrate and recognize.
So the Jews for Jesus. They call themselves Messianic Jews, or they call them, no?
No, not at
Is
all.
that Mike?
But they have a Seder. They recognize our Sabbath. I mean,
Is
and
the
they
kid,
just-
so do you do the wedding? I'll make it even harder. Muslim mother, Jewish father. Point is that this is a real issue, isn't it? And it was an issue 2,000 years ago. Roman parents. So if you take it from the context, maybe this is about interfaith marriage.
I like
Moral.
the answer that somebody very respected gave me.
Which was?
I would do it outside of the tradition of Judaism.
It's a great answer.
It was.
Great answer.
What does that actually mean?
That means that you
It
can,
meant that the rabbi would do it, but not under a huppah.
and now with a talit on. You can do it as a California state.
right.
I can marry anybody.
Right.
I can marry a chair to a table, according to the state of California.
They say that
The
last.
state of California will let me marry anybody to anybody. They'll let me marry, God knows, I don't think there's any. In fact, I think they want to arrest me if I won't marry a chair to a table. So, okay. But the point is that it's the choices, right? It's the choices we make. Couple comes to you. Do you say they're a gay couple? Well, okay, gay is not, you can't have a gay marriage in Judaism. The ceremony is what the ceremony is. But two people love each other, so do you do it? You just don't do it under chuppah. I'm not trying to make anyone feel an answer. What I'm trying to explain is that this topic about supposedly an oven, right, is applicable today as it was 2,000 years ago. The topic of can I extinguish a candle on Shabbat, which seems ludicrous on the first point, actually gives us the teaching of what's most important to God is the candle flame of God, which is our souls. So Talmud, which on the surface, Who cares about a candle on Shabbat by a sick person if you can extinguish it? Who cares about an oven? Right? But if you explore it deeper, do you see the power and value in the Talmud? Does that make sense to everyone?
Mhm.
Did it float this time?
So much better. Thank you.
So does that make sense to people online? If you didn't, please type in, or Lionel will catch if you type in. So this Talmud speaks, again, if you're trying to follow it linearly. Is an oven kosher, or is it allowed or not allowed? They all say no. Eliezer says yes, and a tree moves 100 yards. What? And then the stream goes backwards. What? And then the walls start to fall, and someone says stop, and they do. And then God speaks, and the rabbis say, God, stay out of it. This is already ludicrous. What the hell does this have to do with an oven? And why should I even care? Right? And then a guy's excommunicated, fields are burned, and a man dies over an oven?
How do you begin to get all this and put it together?
Yeah. There's so much in the Talmud that
So the question, daf yomi is the practice of studying a page a day. Maybe someday I'll do it. I have not done it up to this point in my life. And honestly, I don't have a great desire to, but I'm sure that'd be great value for me if I had the time to really, really explore it. But it goes back to that statement of a student says to his rabbi, I went through every page of the Talmud, and the rabbi replies, but how many pages went through you? If you look at the Talmud, the way most of the time it is looked at, do this, don't do this. And then my favorite cop-out of rabbis, the Talmud says, and you say where, and they say, well, it just says so. Okay. If they say it says so, confront anyone. Anyone says to you, any rabbi says to you, the Talmud says, and it doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't feel right in your heart, confront them and say, excuse me, where? Where does it say that? Don't just say the Talmud says, like I'm supposed to accept your authority. Okay? I almost made a political comment I'm not going to make. So, the more you steep yourself in thinking, the more you view the world rabbinically. The more you view the world, it becomes part of you, and you view connections. And if we can dialogue and debate because we see patterns and connections, we see more and more threads. When we see how those threads intersect, we understand how I can pull on this thread and it changes this thread. Can we all agree that if I pulled hard enough on this tablecloth, this cup of coffee is going to fall down? Right? It's going to happen. Whether it happens if I pull lightly or hard. One of my sons, does anyone know what cart surfing is? Cart surfing is when you're playing golf and you jump on the back of the cart because you're supposed to be walking and someone else is driving. I know kids don't cart surf, and it's forbidden in any golf course for obvious reasons. Well, didn't listen. The day's playing golf, playing with people, jumped on the cart, tumbled and bruised himself up. I said, "Look, this is why." I got no sympathy for you. I'm sorry, son. This is why I've said don't do it. What's the upside? What's the downside? The upside is you're a little faster there. The downside is you could, God forbid it, really hurt yourself, right? Don't drink and drive. When you start seeing patterns, you start looking at the world differently. Talmud has the opportunity, gives us the opportunity to study and look and see patterns, see how things are connected. See how the world works, understand it and explore it, not from just one facet. If I'm looking only at this side of the eraser, I'm looking at a piece of plastic that says, let me turn it right side up, that says true red. So I guess this is probably a red marker on the other side, right? It's only when I'm able to see the other side that I understand more. Talmud teaches us. That's why when someone says, why do Jews argue? Because it comes from this tradition where we're surrounding, like the oven. Remember, it says here that their arguments coiled around the oven like a serpent. It coils us around. When we start seeing things from many perspectives, then we start to understand more truth. And Judaism is a pursuit for truth. It's a pursuit for justice. So it doesn't take, we're all old enough to see a pattern, right? I sent an email out last Saturday night after the 2 attacks. Okay, I don't know how many of you read it or did not read it. Okay. And It doesn't take a genius, when I sent that out on Saturday night, to know that it's a short amount of time before they're blaming Israel for the attacks. Right? And I put that in the email. And the next day, on Sunday, the New York Times is blaming Israel for these attacks. I don't know if you knew that or not. The New York Times the next day. Literally the next day. Right? It doesn't take a genius to see that. It doesn't take, my sons wouldn't necessarily see that, although they've hopefully been educated, but a 6-year-old wouldn't necessarily see that. Someone who pays no attention to the news wouldn't necessarily see that. Someone who's not Jewish might not necessarily see that. But I think all of us who are a little bit more, hopefully wiser, and certainly older, over bar mitzvah age, we all know that the idea that they went in and killed 7 people coming out of services, as far as the dialogue about Palestine, Israel, the United States that's going to be swept under the rug pretty quickly, isn't it? That's not going to be part of the dialogue, is it? The idea of if God forbid 2 Arabs were killed, that would stay as part of the dialogue. Ilan Omar and Rashid Tlaib would make sure of it. But ours gets swept under the rug. We're all old enough to know that, to expect that even. And because we see a pattern. Well, Talmud helps us to see more patterns in more ways. And whether it's looking at an oven and saying, wait, there's something else here, whether it's looking at a candle flame and realizing it takes us on a journey. If you tried to follow that passage in Shabbat, in Masechta Shabbat, linearly, that's why I kept saying, remember, it's about a candle, it's about Shabbat, and I promise you they're going to get to the answer. I kept saying that because I know that it seemingly makes no sense, but it does. That's what Talmud does. It takes you on a journey. And that's why Talmud literally means you will study and you will teach. It means both. We study and teach. And why we call our Talmud partners that we study with Chavruta, friends. So in a lot of synagogues that are more observant synagogues, there might be a weekly, every other day, whatever it may be, a regularly scheduled Talmud class with men. Now I'm going to tell you a little secret. Have you ever been to, Montsion used to have one. I don't know if they still do. Long ago they used to, I think. So why do you have a Talmud study once a week? It's to study the Talmud? No, it's to build the relationships. Because the chavruta you make chavruta, you make friends. Pray together, you make friends. It's not, we're trying to do this Thursday morning Talmud or tefillin once a month, and hopefully we'll do more than once a month. The idea is not just to wrap tefillin. Yes, that makes a difference in each of our lives. The other reason is because you get enough people, you're starting to build an organically grown group of friends that are studying together, that are praying together, that are learning together. Because all we're doing on the Thursdays is what? We're wrapping tefillin, we're talking about the Torah portion. Well, if you can get that and you get a large enough group, you start to create an organic community. And that's important in the world. Excuse me, that's really important. So Talmud gives us all those opportunities. I invite you to take home these handouts, read the article that I actually wrote about the needs of the tribe versus the will of God. It might help explain some of it. And so what do you guys think of Talmud now? Remember I said last week, when I was a young man, I thought Talmud was for old men who had too much time on their hands. Now I think it holds the secrets to the universe. What do you guys think now that you've been studying? What do you think of it?
Well, we've seen 2 pages out of, I don't know, what, 7,000 up there. Are the other ones like this? Or are they?
Some are just Agadah, some are just halakha. But I believe that there's no halakha without something deeper. There's always something else going on. That's my belief and my experience. I'm not saying I'm right, but that's my belief.
I guess for me, I feel like it's.
Wait, you hit the table. You're the one who told me I can't hit the table. You just hit the. Busted. Okay.
You're doing much better tonight.
I'm trying.
I know you did.
I'm trying. I try and get better each day.
I'm thinking about what I want to say when I'm down here. Get my But anyway, I guess I enjoyed the stories, but I'm the kind of person that needs to have a more direct route to get to the information that I'm searching.
Cliff
And
notes.
I
Talmud
take,
Cliff Notes.
what's that?
Cliff Notes of Talmud.
Well, but that's thinking linearly. And one of the
It
things
is.
that Talmud forces you to do, if you study Talmud as opposed to just studying the halacha, is it forces you to not think linearly. And the human brain does not naturally think linearly. That's not how any of our conversations work, is it?
I'm trying.
Think about it. If you sit down with a group of friends over a glass of wine for an hour and a half, it's not just a linear conversation ever, is it? That's not how we work as human beings. And the Talmud reminds us of that and keeps us in a Jewish mind frame. So I want to leave you with one other thought. And it's a Jewish concept, but you find it through Talmud. We think in Western culture, you either think rationally or you think irrationally, right? That's how we're all taught in Western culture. Judaism does not think rationally nor irrationally, it thinks non-rationally. We think the way life is, as opposed to the way we want to force it into a box. Jewish mindset, real Jewish, authentic Jewish thinking doesn't look at this one path, but is trying to experience all of the different ways, which means that the idea is, because at the end of the day, it's all about experiencing a relationship with God, what we call yichud, unification with God. And it's not irrational either. It's just non-rational, which is how we all actually naturally think anyhow. And again, the proof in it is, if we all just sat down over a glass of wines and cigars, and we sat here for an hour and a half talking about anything anyone wants to talk about, we're going to be all over the map, aren't we? Right? So Talmud allows us. Are there questions on there, Orlando? Okay. So next week, we're going to have Tu B'Shvat Seder. We're not doing it online, so you got to be here if you want to do it. So we're going to be doing a Tu B'Shvat Seder, which is a wonderful experience, a lot of fun and very meaningful. And I hope this was good for all you guys. Okay. Thank you. Also, I know Orlando has sent out